The WarGames match was a gimmick match used originally in the National Wrestling Alliance and later held annually in World Championship Wrestling, usually at their Fall Brawl pay-per-view event in September. History: WarGames was created by Dusty Rhodes when he saw the film Beyond Thunderdome and remembered the steel cages were part of his career. It was originally used as a specialty match for the Four Horsemen. The first WarGames match took place at the Omni in Atlanta during the NWA's Great American Bash '87 tour, where it was known as WarGames. The match Beyond It would be held at two house shows later that year, once in Chicago at the UIC Pavilion and the other at the NWA's debut at the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. The next year, it would be held during the Great American Bash Tour in 1988 at 11 house shows. The final WarGames matches under the NWA banner were at the Great American Bash in 1989 and a house show rematch at the Omni in Atlanta. WCW used it originally in 1991 at Wrestle War and at 5 house shows during the 1991 Great American Bash Tour and in 1992 at Wrestle War, before it became a traditional Fall Brawl event from 1993 to 1998. The earlier WarGames, generally from 1987 to 1992, are regarded as some of the best matches in NWA and WCW history. Format: the WarGames match consisted of two teams of either 4 or 5 men each facing off with each other in staggered entry format. The setup of the cage consisted of 2 rings side by side with a giant ring encompassing cage that covered both rings, but not the ringside area. Doors were placed at far corners of the rectangular cage so the two teams didn't come into contact before they were supposed to. The match began with one member of each team entering the cage. After 5 minutes, a member from one of the teams would enter the cage, giving his team the temporary handicap advantage. After 2 minutes, a member from the other team would enter to even the odds. Entrants alternated between teams every 2 minutes, giving the coin toss winning team the temporary advantage in the numbers game before giving the other team the advantage with the freshest man and even odds. Once all 8 or 10 men had entered the cage, what was referred to as the match Beyond began. Both teams would brawl in the cage for as long as it took until a member of either team submitted, surrendered, or was knocked unconscious. There was no pinfall and no disqualification, which often led to brutal and bloody confrontations. Match history: 1. The Real Sting only made a brief appearance in the match, entering and cleaning house on the NWO before departing and not returning, giving the NWO a 4-on-3 advantage for the end of the match. 2 unaired house show matches: 3 part of the 1988 Great American Bash Tour, which were all house shows. 4 was released on WWE's Four Horsemen DVD in 2007. 5 As a result of the victory, Hulk Hogan received 5 minutes alone in the cage with the Taskmaster as per a pre-match stipulation. However, he was attacked by the Giant before the time limit was up. WCW WarGames variations: 1998. In 1998, WCW decided to try something different and converted WarGames into a 3-team, 9-man competition for the number 1 contendership to the WCW World Heavyweight title. Team WCW consisted of Diamond Dallas Page, Roddy Piper, The Warrior. Team Hollywood consisted of Hollywood Hogan, Stevie Ray, Bret Hart. Team Wolfpack consisted of Kevin Nash, Sting, Lex Luger. Hogan entered the cage early, by force, so he and Stevie Ray could take out all the other participants, including their teammate Bret Hart. When Hogan went to pin Kevin Nash, smoke engulfed the ring and it appeared that the Warrior had magically entered the cage. Hogan and Stevie Ray beat him down, but more smoke appeared, and when it cleared away the Warrior was gone, leaving Hogan holding his coat. The real Warrior then ran out from the back to enter the match. Hogan would eventually force his way out of the cage door, with Warrior following suit by climbing up the cage wall and kicking it in. Davey Boy Smith suffered a near-career-ending back injury earlier that night after he fell on the trapdoor WCW used for this stunt. He became dependent on painkillers during his rehabilitation from this injury, which would ultimately contribute to his early death. Perry Saturn was also injured from the trapdoor, but not as severely. Page won the match by scoring the Diamond Cutter on Stevie Ray for the pinfall victory. He went on to Halloween Havoc to face Goldberg for the title, only to lose after being hit with a spear and jackhammer. 2000. After no WarGames match was held in 1999, Vince Russo brought back WarGames in a new format he called WarGames 2000, with the tagline, Russo's Revenge. It was held on the September 4th episode of WCW Nitro in 2000. The match consisted of two teams vying for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in a three-tiered cage, first seen in the climax of the WCW-produced film Ready to Rumble and later used at Slamboree in May 2000. The rules combined the traditional WarGames entry rules with the rules of the Slamboree match. The difference was that, instead of the belt hanging from the rafters atop the third cage, the belt was actually inside the third cage. Also, once a wrestler retrieved the belt from the third cage, he did not automatically win it, as was the case at Slamboree. This time, the wrestler had to climb back down into the first cage and then exit via the cage door. The wrestler who exited the structure with the belt, regardless of whether or not he was the one to retrieve it from the third cage, won the match and the championship. The match pitted Sting, Booker T, Goldberg, and Kronik against Russo's hand-picked team, WCW World Champion Kevin Nash, Jeff Jarrett, Scott Steiner, and the Harris Brothers. The match had been scheduled as a 4-on-4 match, with Sting, Booker T, Goldberg and Ernest Miller against Nash, Jarrett, Steiner and Russo. Earlier in the night, each man from the first team was forced to wrestle a qualifying match to compete. Sting beat both Vampire and the Great Muta in a handicap match. Goldberg defeated Shane Douglas, and Booker T had to defeat his brother Stevie Ray. However, Miller lost to Kronik in a handicap match, making it 5-on-4. Thus, when it was his turn to enter, Russo sent the Harris brothers instead, making it even. During the match, Nash teased a betrayal. When he entered the first cage, he chokeslammed Sting, then grabbed Steiner, Jarrett and Russo by the throats. However, as Vince Russo was later walking to the door, Nash grabbed and hugged him. The Harris brothers and Kronik drove each other out of the arena. Booker T retrieved the belt from the top, but Russo interfered on behalf of his team. Ernest Miller entered the ring, but was jackknife powerbombed by Nash. Steiner and Jarrett handcuffed Sting and Booker to the walls of the second cage. Goldberg broke free of the handcuffs which held him to the turnbuckle of the ring and attempted to leave the cage with the belt, but was cut off by Bret Hart, who slammed the cage door in his face. Nash then retrieved the title belt and walked out the cage door, retaining the title. Spin-off matches. Combat Zone Wrestling. Combat Zone Wrestling has used WarGames stipulations for some of their Cage of Death events, the most recent being in Cage of Death 15. For Cage of Death 5 there were eliminations that would happen when a wrestler would hit the arena floor. However, Cage of Death 5 also had rules that the wrestlers who were not tossed out of or off the cage, that they could travel a scaffold hanging above another ring filled with thumbtacks to safety, scoring points for the team. For Cage of Death 6 there were eliminations that would happen when a wrestler would hit the arena floor, much like Cage of Death 5 the year before. The difference being that the tag team titles were hanging on a scaffold stretched across the length of the top of the cage overlooking the two rings. Cage of Death 7 just had standard pinfall and submissions after all combatants entered the cage. For 2008's Cage of Death, the WarGames rules returned with pinfalls and submissions that could be done throughout the match. Extreme Pro Wrestling. Rob Black's Extreme Pro Wrestling promotion also capitalized on the popularity of the WarGames match by holding one of their own, called Genocide, with the same rules. However, the XPW version of the cage had a cover over only one of the rings, permitting wrestlers to brawl atop the cage into table spots off the top of the cage. The cage, however, was extremely poorly constructed, and started to fall apart during the match, preventing most of the promised action. WWE In the past several years, WWE has held a match called the Elimination Chamber. When it was announced by Raw General Manager Eric Bischoff, he claimed that it was partially inspired by WarGames. A new version of this match, dubbed the Extreme Elimination Chamber, was introduced at ECW December to Dismember 2006. The primary difference between the two is that the Extreme Elimination Chamber features weapons inside the pods and could be used after each participant entered the match. WWE sent out a survey in October 2009 to WWE fans asking what they wanted to rename the pay-per-view Judgment Day. One of those choices was WWE WarGames. In recent years, WWE has included an Elimination Chamber Tornado Tag Team Elimination match similar to WarGames in its yearly WWE video game franchise. In June 2013, WWE released a DVD anthology set, WarGames, WCW's Most Notorious Matches. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling has their own variation of the WarGames match, entitled Lethal Lockdown, and held at TNA's annual Lockdown pay-per-view. The only differences are that one ring is used, the roof is lowered once everyone is in the ring, the roof has weapons, and pinfalls are allowed. Ring of Honor. In December 2005, Ring of Honor held the first Steel Cage Warfare match. It was used to settle the year-long feud between Generation Next and their former leader Alex Shelley, who was now with the Embassy. The match consisted of only one ring, but followed the WarGames match in that two wrestlers from each team started the match, and after 5 minutes another wrestler would enter, then every 2 minutes after another wrestler would enter. The main difference, however, is that the match was an elimination match. In July 2006, Ring of Honor held another WarGames-style match to settle their feud with Combat Zone Wrestling. ROH challenged them to a Steel Cage Warfare match, but CZW said they would only compete if it were their Cage of Death match. In September 2008, Ring of Honor held a 3-team Steel Cage Warfare match. This pitted the team of the Briscoe brothers and Austin Aries against the team of the Age of the Fall represented by Delirious, Jimmy Jacobs and Tyler Black, against Necro Butcher, who fought alone with no partners. The match was held under the same rules, stating Butcher, although alone, could be drawn and enter the match at any time regardless of a man advantage held by the other teams. In June 2013, another Steel Cage Warfare match was held, pitting an ROH team of BJ Whitmer, Michael Elgin, Jay Lethal and Kevin Steen against the SCUM team of Jimmy Jacobs, Rhino, Cliff Compton and Rhett Titus, where if the ROH team wins, SCUM must disband, but if the SCUM team wins, Steve Corino replaces Nigel McGuinness as matchmaker. Team ROH won the match on a taped episode of Ring of Honor Wrestling Television. Major League Wrestling on September 19, 2003 at the WarGames TV taping held at the Fort Lauderdale, Florida War Memorial Auditorium. The Funkin' Army defeated the Extreme Horsemen when Funk made Corino submit following a fireball to Corino's face. The match was shown on Florida's Sunshine Network United Wrestling Federation on September 21, 2007. United Wrestling Federation held a WarGame match in Richmond, Virginia. Team Sergeant Slaughter Death, Team JBL in a double-ring double-cage WarGames match when Scott Steiner submitted Corino with the Steiner recliner as Slaughter simultaneously submitted JBL with the Cobra Clutch. IWA Mid-South Independent Wrestling Association Mid-South presented No Blood, No Guts, No Glory 2005 at the National Guard Armory in Valparaiso, Indiana on Saturday night, the 7th of February 2005. The match pitted Team Ian Rotten, Axel Rotten, Chris Hero, Corporal Robinson and Bull Payne against Team Fannin, BJ Whitmer, Eddie Kingston, Mark Wolf, JC Bailey, and Steve Stoneham. Team NWA, Eric Priest, Chandler McClure, Tank and Sal and Vito Tomaselli in a double ring, double cage, three-team WarGames match with the winning team taking full control of the IWA Miz. The match was won when J.C. Bailey caused his own team to be outnumbered, allowing Ian Rotten's team IWA to capitalize and win the match. Women Superstars Uncensored. Women Superstars Uncensored presented the first ever WarGames match with female wrestlers on November 19, 2011 as part of their Breaking Barriers 2 IPPV. The match featured two trios, Team WSU of Mercedes Martinez, Alicia and Brittany Savage, and the Midwest Militia of Jessica Havoc, Allison Kay and Sassy Steffi. The match was contested in a steel cage surrounding only one ring, but all other rules were the same as the original concept. The Midwest Militia won the match when Havoc threatened to murder Martinez with a machete, and Savage surrendered on Martinez's behalf.